Well, it's officially noon, so I can wish you good afternoon. Welcome. We're so glad that you've joined us here, either in person at the Laramie County Library, or if you're watching from online. We welcome you, and we're glad that you have tuned in to learn a little bit more about the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra program tomorrow night. My name is William Intriligator. I'm the music director and conductor. And joining me on the stage is Tenacity Dricker-Wade, the co-owner and director of the Audubon Dance Studio, with whom we're partnering on the first piece on the program tomorrow. Welcome, Tenacity.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Did I get your title right? I know I was asking about that.
Yes. I have many titles, but that's the one I'll take this way.
So we have something very special planned for you tomorrow. It's a really beautiful piece of music by Michi Wianko, who is a fantastically talented violinist, composer, and arranger. Originally from Southern California, she now lives on the East Coast. She's a member of the East Coast Chamber Orchestra and does a lot of arranging for them. And the piece that we're performing is her La Folia Variations, which she arranged for the East Coast Chamber Orchestra. And it's essentially the Concerto Grosso No. 12 by Geminiani, a piece that was written in the 1700s. And it itself was based on a piece by Arcangelo Corelli. And so what Michi Wianko has done, she's taken the Geminiani Concerto Grosso and added incredible musical, modern techniques to sort of reimagine it, if you will. It's like, she actually likes to call these compositions reimaginings, not just arrangements. But what's extra special about this is that not only is this, I think, the Wyoming premiere of this musical piece, but I believe this is the world premiere of it ever being danced to by a dance company. So we had the idea, we love partnering with the Audubon Dance Studio. The Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra has a long-standing, annual, really, partnership with working with these wonderful dancers and with Tenacity. And so we invited them to listen to this piece and create original choreography to it. And I'm quite sure it's the first time it's ever been done to this piece of music. So I'm excited. How about you?
Yes, I'm very, very, very excited.
Yeah, tell us about it. Yeah.
So the piece itself is a little bit longer. So I had to, when going to choreograph, I had to approach it more along the lines of classical ballet. The classical ballet is a few hours worth of music that's continuously go through, and a lot of the type of work that I do are shorter pieces, so 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 6 minutes, things like that. This piece is close to 13 minutes, and so I kind of had to get in a different mindset with it, because that's a little bit longer than what I'm used to doing, or what the dancers even are used to doing. And so
it's funny that in the orchestra world, it's considered like a regular size orchestra.
Yeah,
it's not long. It's
I'm sure it's for you guys are probably like, oh, this isn't long at all. But for us, we're like, oh my gosh, 13 minutes. That's
we don't have to jump and dance the whole time.
Yeah. So I just kind of approached it. I listened to it a whole bunch and just tried to find like feelings that it would evoke, or I looked for different musical cues, because it's not a piece of music that myself or any of my dancers are going to be familiar with, and so we typically are counters. So we will assign everything a count. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what you do on those counts. With the piece being so long for us, that's a lot of counts for them to memorize on top of their choreography. So I really wanted them to be able to just listen for musical cues, so that we could really focus on what you guys were doing and not focus on the counts, because sometimes we get bogged down in that, I won't lie. But because of that means I needed to do that. I needed to let go of my counting process and just listen to the music and start to find those cues, and then from there I was able to I just put music on and let myself kind of move around and see what type of movement comes out. I knew that because we usually do classical ballet with you guys, I wanted to go more of what's considered like a lyrical contemporary style, so that it's not that classical ballet is rigid, but it does have sets of rules. You know, your arms go here, your leg goes here, you have to do these kind of things, whereas the type of style we're doing is much more fluid, and I feel like it fits the music better.
That's wonderful. I was curious about that, because the music itself is sort of like neo-Baroque, if you will. It sounds like it does sound like Baroque music. It really is the Gimignani Concerto Grosso with just a few changes here and there, really. And so I wondered, and I actually asked Tenacity this just last night, is there anything kind of like Baroque in either the costumes or in the dancing or anything like that, or is it more of a modern take? Because giving you essentially just carte blanche. I was curious as to what your process was and how you came up with it, and so I'm actually glad, that you've chosen to do something that's a little bit more lyrical.
Yeah, definitely modern. And the title of the concert is A Time to Reflect, and so I kind of started to do that, and there's kind of a loose story to it. It's really just about different relationships that women have in our lives, and what we can do to work with each other, whether it's mom, grandma, daughter, friend, stranger, and how sometimes we are stubborn and we want to do things all on our own. We don't need any help, even though we're surrounded by a lot of help. And so that kind of just started to form when I was working, and then I ended up, because it was a more modern take, I wanted to do different age ranges and groups for the piece, and so I really like what you had said when we were talking yesterday, like teams. We have different teams, and we're split into our teams by our costumes. So we have like a younger group of girls, and then two, I would call them middle group of girls, and then we do have an older group of ladies that kind of band together, and sometimes we two together, sometimes individuals stand out within the group, and it's
so there isn't just one center star and it sort of changes and it sort of orbits around different stages of life even?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. Yeah.
Oh, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
One of the things that also made me think that this piece would be great with dance is that the composer, the arranger, really, Michi Wianco, she put all these wonderful comments in the score for the musicians. Frequently it says, dance. And then there are times where the musicians have to stomp their feet, and we literally do stomp the feet and add extra percussion. But some of the other modern techniques that I was talking about, which Gimignani never would have dreamed of writing in the 1700s, are things like snap pizzicatos, where the strings play a pizzicato so strongly that it snaps against the fingerboard and makes a percussive sound. Another thing is colegno, when the strings turn their bows upside down and play with the wooden part of the bow, creating a sort of eerie kind of tinkly effect, which in the score says it should sound like clockwork. And it really does, it's brilliant. Another thing is to play with near the bridge, the part that holds up the strings of the string instruments. By the way, this piece is scored for just strings and percussion. So the strings really are center stage on this. So when they play very close to what we call the bridge, the thing that holds up the four strings of the instruments, it has a steely kind of eerie sound, and there are many times where the composer writes to be extremely close to the bridge, so it's very much that sound. And then there are just wonderful other effects, like she'll write in the score that there's a part where the violins go cha-cha-cha-cha-cha, and she writes barking. She's incredibly descriptive in her language, and then there's a whole section that's called swashbuckling. It's just wonderful, and it really does sound like that. So the descriptions in the score kind of helped inspire me, thinking that this is sort of a story, and there is a dance element to it. So that was kind of one of the reasons why I thought it would work so well.
Yeah, you had talked about where the string players pluck their strings.
Yeah.
So in the recording that you gave us in our studio space, it's big and we have heaters and fans going while we're dancing. And there's a certain section that's very, very hard for us to hear. So I'm excited about that part because we will kind of be hearing it for the first time when you guys play it.
I know exactly which part you're talking about. Why don't I play them a little example of what this piece sounds like? It is such a cool piece, and it does sound very much like Baroque music at the beginning. It's the first 30 seconds or minute or two are almost exactly like the Gimignani original. And here it is. essentially that's almost like the theme upon which there will be 23 short variations. And the whole thing is just 12 minutes long. And why is it called La Folia? Because even Corelli, who was the inspiration for the Gimignani, who was the inspiration for the Bianco, he based it on an even older set of chord progressions that has come down to us known as La Folia, or the Folly. And when it maybe first appeared in the 1600s, or even actually 1500s, it was associated with a dance that people would sometimes use, unusual dance moves, including having people on people's shoulders. It was kind of a wild dance or a crazy dance. But basically what these composers have done over the years, and there have been so many composers who use La Folia as a sort of basis for another piece of music. The La Folia itself is it's just a chord progression. It's like saying the 12-bar blues, and there are so many different 12-bar blues, right? Well, so that's basically what La Folia is. It's this unusual 16-bar from the 1500s chord progression. It's not blues, but you'll hear those same chords going through, and then the series of variations during this piece. There's one moment, and I think it's the moment that Tenacity was talking about, that's very quiet, where it's like a moment of repose, and it's gorgeous, and it does switch from D minor, which almost the entire piece is in, to D major. And there's a special moment when that happens. I think that's the quiet moment that it's hard for you to hear. Because the beats are very subtle in there, and it's slow as well. But it's just brilliant what Michi Wianco does to bring attention to this piece that she loved by Gimignani and bring it up to date, if you will. So, any else things you want to share about that?
Just one thing, actually, since you were talking about like the chord progressions and then how they kind of show up throughout all of them, I kind of, because when I'm listening, I can hear those, so we do have like certain moves and things that it's not exactly the same, but they run through each section for us or each little group, so that you can, so if you're gonna be able to watch it, you can try and look for those different little things that pop out.
Yeah, and are there any especially challenging parts for the singers other than being able to hear that one quiet section? Any particular ballet moves or choreo dance moves that they're doing that you want to focus our attention to?
Well, just because of the past couple of years, we worked with a little bit of lifting, like partnering. And so that was hard because we haven't been, we've been distanced just like everybody else and not able to work on that. And so getting that in was actually, I have a group of older girls with a group of the younger girls that are working on that part. And that's actually been kind of a lot of fun while being hard, because the whole idea of being able to like be close enough to touch each other and pick each other up again was challenging at first, and it was hard at first, and then we went into a process where, they're kind of younger girls, teenage girls, so there was lots of giggling and laughing, and then, they were able to get it in there, and now it's working, and they're finding the ways to do it and make it look nice and smooth and stuff. So that was definitely challenging. It's towards the very end. I know the percussion comes in, I think, like with a block. And there's there's a couple of big moments in there. And because they're so used to counting, and I didn't give them counts for it, we're doing a few of them are jumping on those big moments, but I'm not letting them jump on every moment. And so that is really kind of a struggle for them. They're like, oh, but if we hurry this part up, we can jump on this other big moment. And it's like, no. We want that one empty. There's 3 here, and we're going to go on the first one, and the third one, we're going to leave that middle one alone. So that's just training their brains to really, again, listen to that music and not do what is expected.
Right. And not make it always the same for every musical cue.
Yeah.
That's brilliant, yeah. So was it hard during the pandemic to completely leave out those close contact ballet and other forms of dance moves, the lifts and everything like that?
Yes. I didn't realize how hard it was at first, because we're just focused on keeping everyone safe and following rules and doing all that kind of thing. And so we got through it, and then last year, we came in and, I have other teachers that work for me and stuff, and so they would ask questions about it. I'm like, no, it's best to stay distance. We're not going to do that. Even like the thing that actually was hardest was like we work with little guys, like 3 years old and stuff. And for them, whenever we're starting class, we always hold hands. You know, it's always just something that we do. And that, I think, was the hardest part, because it's hard for them. They don't understand why they can't hold hands, you know? And so that was really hard. And then this year, you know, we are masking and doing all of that, and so we're able to come in and talk a little bit in certain classes with parents and to see if they would be okay with them getting back into that and stuff. And it was once we started doing it again, it was like, oh my gosh, I missed this so much, like, you know, and you don't realize it until you get to have it again. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, this is a perfect segue for you to tell us a little bit more about the studio itself and where people can maybe find out some more information and what kind of programs you have for people of all ages.
Yeah. So it's Audubon Dance Studio, and it's actually here in downtown Cheyenne. It's over on 18th Street. And we have been around for 34 years. And I have been at the studio for all 34 of those years, so that is kind of exciting to me. I have owned the studio for 5 years. And then, yes, we offer all ages, so starting at age 3 all the way up. A few years ago, we did have a lady in our adult tap class who was 89 years old, and she just was amazing and would just come in and tap and just have the best time. So we like to say any age can dance, any shape can dance. We just want everyone to come and dance and have fun. And we have our website is onavantwy.com, and you can find any and all information there. And we do offer a free child class. So if you want to get a friend, a daughter, granddaughter, yourself, you can just come and check it out, see what you like, and
That sounds wonderful.
but first, you should really come watch us and dance with the symphony. I think that's going to be really amazing.
Well, it's a special highlight for our season too. We really, as I said before, we really enjoy partnering with you, and every time you bring such a high level of professionalism and integrity to your work, and I think it's fantastic, the skills, life skills and dance skills that you're passing on to younger generations. And so it's really a pleasure to share the stage with you today. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Tenacity. Well, also on the program, we have another piece that's for strings and percussion. But don't worry, we bring out the woodwinds, brass, and timpani and others later for other pieces too. But I want to bring special attention to another piece called a novelette, which is like a small story, right? A short story, a novelette. A novella, we would call it. This is a musical novella by the English composer Samuel Coleridge Taylor. And he was, yes, named after the English poet Samuel Taylor Coleridge. But he was a fantastic violinist, composer, and conductor in England in the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s. He lived an unfortunately short life, dying at the age of 37. But he wrote this piece, the one that we're performing, it's the fourth of his 4 novelettes, around 1902, which was around the same year that he actually met Theodore Roosevelt at the White House when Roosevelt was president. He had an amazing life, Coleridge Taylor did. He was quite celebrated in England in a way that probably wouldn't have been possible for a person of African descent, as he was, if he had been raised in America. But he had special feeling toward American culture, specifically Afro-American culture. He traced his father's roots not just to Sierra Leone, which was a British colony, but to his deeper, farther ancestry to Creole and African, slaves from America. And he was interested in his heritage, as you would expect from somebody who grew up in England, surrounded by whiteness in the very white-dominated classical music world. And also, he didn't know his father, really. His father left England shortly. It's depending on different accounts. It was either just before he was born, and the father probably didn't even know that Coleridge Taylor's mother was pregnant, or was just after he was born. But his father was a doctor, and there was no opportunities for him at that time in medicine in London, so he went back to Sierra Leone. Coleridge Taylor was raised by his mother and her dad, his grandfather, and early on showed great promise as a violinist. By age 5 or 6 or 7 was already concertizing. By the age of 15, he was accepted to the Royal College of Music and had some of the greatest professors and teachers there who said, this is the real deal. This is a major composer. And luckily, he achieved some great success early on in his life. At the age of 23, he scored a huge hit. The poetry of Longfellow was very popular then, and he created a cantata for chorus, orchestra, and solo voices based on Hiawatha's Wedding. Later in his short life, he also completed that story with a sort of trilogy of cantatas, Minnehaha's Return, all sorts of other things. So, at age 23, this oratorio that he wrote became a huge sensation. It was performed all over England, in Europe and America too, and it was said that perhaps it rivaled the popularity of Messiah and Elijah in terms of its a popular oratorio. I don't think he had as much business acumen. I don't think he had financial success, but he was well known and well respected. And when he would tour, he had 3 tours of the United States. When he would tour, that was part of the reason why he had the, at that time, kind of unheard of privilege for a person of African descent to have an appearance with the president at the White House, which was so cool. So this is a piece, his novelette. Let me play a little bit of it. It's for strings, as I said, strings and percussion. And it tries to tap into a little bit of perhaps his African roots. There are some driving rhythms. And he was interested in folk tunes. He really had as his models for composition Dvorak and Brahms. But really Dvorak, and the way that Dvorak used folk dance and folk songs really was his inspiration. So there's a bit of a folk-like element to this, but it's really, it's not exactly that. Here's how it starts. It's very driving and exciting. Exciting piece. And when it is played with its companion pieces, novelettes number 1, 2, and 3, it comes as a kind of exciting conclusion to the set, because the first 3 are actually very much like cultured, civilized English dances and very melodious. And then this one just sort of like lets it all out and is sort of more unbuttoned, if you will, and exciting. But Coleridge Taylor didn't mean for these pieces to have to be performed as a unit of 4, and so we're not taking too much liberty by performing it by itself at these concerts with the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra. Coleridge Taylor himself would frequently perform this movement as an encore by itself on some of his concerts when he was alive. There's something in here that I want to point out, which is sort of like an inside joke among string players. There is a part in here that sort of is a hidden little quote. And even our string players didn't hear it at first. I had to point it out to them, then they were laughing in rehearsal. But it's a sort of an inside joke. One of the pieces that string players learn when they're getting started, and it's in the early training books, Suzuki Book 1, is a gavotte by a composer you've probably never heard of, Gossec. Gossec's gavotte is a piece that if I sang it, you would recognize it, because everybody knows that's Gossec's gavotte, right? Okay, so every string player plays it. But listen to what Coleridge Taylor does in a brilliant and sort of sneaky little way to make a sort of parody or homage to the Gossec gavotte for his string players here. It's coming up in just a minute. It's slower and it's in minor, But it's, yeah, here it is in major. Cute, right? So what is the story of this little novella? Well, it's one of those sort of musical ones that is not as clear. It's up to the listener. And he wasn't the first one to write a musical novelette. He took his inspiration from others, notably Robert Schumann, who wrote novelettes for piano as little short piano pieces that Schumann wanted to tell a story, but he didn't tell us what the story was. And it was just a way of describing a short piece of music that doesn't follow a traditional form, but maybe does have some structure to it and tell a story somehow. And so this is a great piece by Coleridge Taylor. If you were at a holiday concert back in December, just a few months ago, you probably heard as an overture his Christmas overture, which started the program. Really a beautiful piece. We hope to keep playing more of Coleridge Taylor's music, and it's a great way that the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra is also performing music of underrepresented groups. So I'm excited about that. Beethoven's Fifth Symphony is on this concert, and I'm sure we all have thoughts about that piece. You know me and Beethoven, I could go on for hours and hours and hours here. And with a piece as familiar as Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, I don't want to get into it too much. You've probably heard me lecture on it before. I think we've performed it with me and the Cheyenne Symphony at least one other time, if not more. One of the challenges for us musicians performing this piece, and I think perhaps for many of you who are familiar with this piece, is to try to hear it and experience it as if it were the first time. And yes, there's something wonderfully comfortable about hearing a piece of music that you know, and you know what's coming, and you know it's going to be exciting and fulfilling. But there's also that thrill of, I can't believe that just happened, which somehow goes away for, let's say, our musicians in the orchestra who probably played it 50 times. And one of my challenges this week in rehearsal is to get them to remember that feeling and to convey that to you, how incredible this music is. So this was probably the first symphony to ever really directly have a story that, without words, that takes us from darkness to light. He did that to a different degree and in a slightly different way with his heroic symphony, the Symphony No. 3, Eroica. But with the Fifth Symphony, he really establishes a narrative that works through all four movements in a way that was not done before. The Eroica also tells a story through the different movements, and it gives a little bit more prominence to the finale, which had always been sort of light ending of a symphony before that. In this case, everything in the Fifth Symphony is going toward the triumph of the finale. And we're not sure that it's going to come. There are many times in the middle movements and in the first movement especially where it's hard to imagine a triumph during something that's so tormented as the first movement. And of course, I don't know, do I need to remind you what it sounds like? Well, here of course is the first movement. Such incredible music. Nobody had really used the orchestra like that up until this point. It's the sort of ferocity of it. And the fact that it's just built on this four-note motif, ba-ba-ba-ba. Sometimes the four notes are just ba-ba-ba-ba, and sometimes it's ba-ba-ba-ba. There are variations of it, but throughout all the movements of this piece, that rhythm permeates, but in none like the first movement, which is essentially built on that building block. The whole first movement, it's everywhere. And that was kind of unheard of at the time. It's passed on, and it's just, to actually have a melody created with this little building block that's passed between instruments like that, that was also very unusual at the time. So this first movement does have moments that are less tormented and ferocious. This whole second theme offers an image and a glimpse of a possibility of hope. And that's one of the great things about this symphony. From near the beginning, there's an establishment of, difficulty and personal challenge. But there's also, right with that, an establishment of hope, of change. One of the things to remember about this is that the symphony was written at a time in 1806, 1808, when there were wars going around Beethoven. This is a symphony born in a revolutionary time. Like the Heroic Symphony, the Beethoven's Third Symphony, this piece is in a way a martial piece about military and about war. Perhaps in no movement is that more clear than in the second movement, where, to me, this double series of variations clearly, almost musically depicts musical revolution. Let me tell you what I mean by that. Let's see here. This is the opening of the movement. And to my ears and my imagination, this is Beethoven depicting a graceful dance of the aristocracy. It's refined. It does have some outbursts every so often, but it's overall very refined. And it has almost a tinge of sentimentality here, which Beethoven didn't like that kind of thing usually. And then we sort of wrap up this picture of aristocracy. And now we have something completely different. The clarinets and bassoons are the peasants singing an almost Gemütlichkeit Länder. This is not the aristocracy. And they have an idea, right? Here's the revolution. Will revolt. It is fun to hear this movement through with that idea of upper class and lower class revolution. Another commentator once described this movement as war and peace. It's interesting. I don't know if they necessarily meant a kind of class revolution, because I really hear that in here as well. That was clearly what was going on in Europe. This sense of mystery here. What's going to happen? This is the way of closing out that second section, the section of the, kind of common folk. And then we come back to the aristocracy. And it's just going to be a pass-up, A section, B section, with variations. So here we have the variation of the opening, the aristocratic dance. One of the most glorious parts of this movement, though, is when the aristocratic dance is finally treated to its moment of glory, where it's sort of combined with the loud intensity of that revolution and played in a glorious kind of moment of, big-heartedness or something in that spirit. The movement ends without a clear ending of what might happen politically or musically. It ends with surprises. There's a section right near the end where it goes, bum, ba, bum, bum. And you think that's it. That's the end. But then there's a little bum, bum. Okay, fake out number one. And then there's bum, ba, bum, bum again. And now, because it happened before, we're expecting bum, bum. But it doesn't come. And it's almost like he's left an open-ended movement here that doesn't have a proper ending. And the story politically, militarily, and musically is left open. The third movement starts in the basement of the orchestra with the cellos and basses playing extremely quietly. And as I told them in rehearsal the other night, my goal would be for the for the audience not to know whether or not the movement has started. That's how quietly it should be. That's hard for them because it's actually part of a cello and bass audition. It's not easy to play, but then to have to play it extremely quietly is tough. This is what it sounds like. Right. You know, I want to backtrack for a moment just to remind you of the motif that goes through all movements, the ba 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 ba. In the second movement, it was there quite a bit. I didn't mention it, but I did want to point out that when the clarinets and bassoons first come in with that Ländler, almost like peasant sort of music, it's ba da dum bum bum bum. So it's ba ba bum 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 bum. That's bum 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 bum, right? So it actually permeates many parts of the second movement as well. And now, after the cellos and basses sort of hint at what's coming up, it's sort of like a macabre movement, third movement. We have the horns play that rhythm from the first movement in an incredible intensity. Could you imagine music that would be both heroic and struggling, more perfect than that music in 1808? The French horns with that sense of, they always sound like the heroes, don't they? I mean, that's why they're used so much in film soundtracks. French horns. And so we have the French horns with that noble, heroic sound, with this rhythm and this, you know, exciting part, but you can still hear the struggle in this C minor, right? In this symphony. We haven't gotten to our triumph yet. There's a middle section of this movement that adds a bit of respite in almost a humorous way, but it's like this rough and tumbleness that the cellos and basses, which were so muted and kind of stifled at the opening, finally get their moment to shine. And they go kind of crazy with it. They switch the key to major, and it's quite exciting. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, it's coming up in just a minute. Okay, we're gonna take center stage for real this time, and we're gonna be loud and in your face. And let's have fun with it too. No more of this struggle. Come on. Beethoven is telling us that there's all these different sides in him, right? Right. And then there's one of the most glorious transitions. You know how many times composers will connect one movement of a symphony to another. This one is perhaps the most ingenious and one of the greatest that ever was a connection. The third movement ends in a molto macabre, very macabre kind of way, with like pizzicato strings and a bassoon playing, and it almost sounds like Dance Macabre of Saint-Saëns. The opening theme. And then all of a sudden, there's like this mysterious key change, and the timpani drum just sort of beats this little rhythm. Bum, 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 bum. Another famous timpani excerpt from auditions. All these, the Fifth Symphony is full of audition pieces for the instruments because it's not easy. But here's what that sounds like, a little bit of the ending of this movement. This sort of skeletal dance macabre kind of feel, or like the mystery of like, the music isn't even fleshed out, really. Pause this. That's a beautiful ringtone, if that's a ringtone. I want that ringtone. All right, here it is. And then there's just this sense of time stopping. Right there. It's very quiet again. And the timpani is just playing this repeated note. And the first violins grow out of that. A little seed is going to start to grow and get bigger and bigger. But it's still like this question of like, the music is questioning and not sure how to go on. everything that's happened up to this point, the drama, the turmoil, the political revolution, all that stuff is about to come to like the goal. But is it? And is he nervous about it? All these things are happening, and finally, it brings in the last movement with incredible glory, and he brings in a whole new set of instruments, trombones, piccolo, contrabassoons, and the full rest of the orchestra. As I was telling the orchestra at rehearsal last night, one of the things that drives the excitement of this last movement is a part that you're not necessarily hearing as much as seeing and feeling. And it's the second violins and violas. So the ones who are right in front of me when I'm conducting, you will see that they're going with their instruments. They have these very fast fortissimo 16th notes, and they are the ones driving the excitement for the whole rest of the orchestra. In fact, there's a part near the very end of this movement where they again remind us. They go in the very near the coda, near the very end, whereas the seconds and violas again. The addition of trombones would have been very unusual at that time. They were a church instrument still in 1806. The addition of piccolo and contrabassoon, maybe they were used in opera orchestras at that point, but never in a symphony. All these pieces are not just making their first entrance in the symphony in the fourth movement, but they're making their first entrance in any symphony ever in the fourth movement of this piece. So, of course, we use trombones regularly in that thank you, Beethoven. One of the other things I want to mention, and I mentioned it a few years ago when we did his Sixth Symphony, the Pastoral, was that he did write the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies simultaneously. It's hard to imagine because they're so different. But these are symphonies that are like fraternal twins. They're from the same time, but they're so different. And what's also telling about them is that they were performed for the first time on the same concert. There is a sense that I think that Beethoven wanted to create a meta-symphony, where the Fifth Symphony is just the first chapter or the first book of the story with 4 chapters. And then the Sixth Symphony is book 2 of what was going on. In fact, before these symphonies were published, the Sixth was almost numbered 5, and the Fifth was almost numbered 6th. But there is a deliberateness to how the Fifth Symphony comes first, and then the Sixth Symphony with its love of nature and its a different kind of musical story and drama that has perhaps behind it a resolution of some of the issues that the Fifth Symphony helps us resolve personally and musically. So there is that wonderful connection, and I encourage you to perhaps turn on a recording of the Sixth Symphony after the concert Saturday night when you get home and see what you think. What does it feel like to experience one and then the other? What he does with that unusual transition from the third movement to the fourth movement with the timpani and how time stops, he does that in the Sixth Symphony quite a bit when he's just repeating and it's just painting a musical sort of, minimalism, but it's changing the way we perceive the motion of time. And that's just one of many examples that show that there are some interesting connections, musically even, between the Fifth and Sixth Symphony. So I hope that we can listen to the Fifth Symphony as if it's our first time and feel the excitement and the revolution and all the intensity of it, the dark and the triumph. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome to the stage to join me our Baritone Soloist for the Mahler songs on this program, Levi Hernandez. Please welcome Levi. Levi, I have to apologize that when I get started about Beethoven, I can't stop, and I hope that we still have about 15, 20 minutes or so. That's great. Welcome back to Wyoming.
Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and about your previous performances with the symphony.
Well, before anything, I want to say I want to move to Cheyenne just to go to the dance studio.
I know, right? Huge tenacity. I know.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Tell us a little bit about where you're based, where you're from, what you're doing, but also you have experience with this orchestra and this
I
audience.
do. This is my third time back. I did Carmina Burana and Messiah under Stephen Althoff.
Both under my wonderful predecessor, Stephen Althoff, yes.
It's great to be back. I am from El Paso, Texas, so the very western point of Texas. Just moved back there about 3.5 years ago from Chicago. That was home before. But now El Paso is where I grew up. My folks are there, so it's nice to be back.
That's great. And I'm sure there's a whole thing we could talk about the pandemic and how that's affected opera singers. But so tell us a little bit about your focus as a musician. What has been your main part of your career here? Is it a lot of works like Carmina Burana and Messiah, or is it actually staged opera?
It's mostly staged opera, and
it's
it's really great to do oratorio or symphonic work. It's a whole different beast. It's a whole different focus, but it's a wonderful experience, and I'm so happy to be part of this.
Oh yeah, we're so happy to have you, and I feel so lucky because I feel like probably you do that. An opportunity to do these specific songs by Mahler is rare, and it's a special musical occasion. There's something so personal about these songs, and especially with that Rückert song that I'm Lost to the World, that it has such incredible beauty and personal significance. So these, it's not just singing any orchestral song. This is Mahler songs. This is special, right?
Right. I had the pleasure and privilege of learning the Rückert Lieder and performing them a couple of times in recital.
That would be with piano.
With piano, absolutely, just with piano. So anytime you have, as a singer, you have an opportunity to work on anything that you've done with piano with an orchestra, you jump on it because it's like riding this wave of sound. It's a whole different feeling, still intimate, but a whole different feeling.
Yeah. So then tell us a little bit more about your opera work. So what are some of the opera roles that you love, that you're your bread and butter? What's your wheelhouse? I mean, yeah.
I'm a Puccini singer. That's a lot of what I do is Puccini.
We love Puccini.
I do a lot of bohems. I just finished a bohem last week at Raleigh with Opera North Carolina. I did 2 Gianni Schicchis this summer, which is part of his Tritico, 1 act comedy. I do a lot of Butterfly, Sharpless and Madame Butterfly, which is the next project that I do in a month.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Great.
So yeah, I love Puccini. I kind of think that these composers, Mahler and Puccini, they just know how to make you feel, really, really make you feel from the get-go.
Yeah, they really do. It's interesting. We don't often combine those two
No.
together. But now that you mentioned it, they were writing at the same time, living at the same time, and in a way trying to achieve something similar in their own respective fields, whether it be symphonic or Lied with Mahler or opera, with that realism of Puccini and that kind of overt emotion. He was bringing the opera tradition into the 20th century, and in a way, Mahler was doing that same thing, even with just his purely instrumental works, like his symphonies, the intensity of the emotion. I mean, maybe even awareness of the subconscious and the kind of developments with Freud and things like that had been happening right around that time.
What I enjoy, Puccini puts it all out there. Literally puts it there. And Mahler likes to just keep that conflict that before it resolves, it just keeps on and keeps on. And when it resolves, it's just incredible. They're both unbelievable, but Mahler is Mahler.
Mahler is Mahler. So it sounds like you're very busy and that the pandemic, at least in its current state, isn't holding you back because you just did a bohem, you're about to do a butterfly. What was it like last year for you? Was that tough?
The last 2 years were very tough. I'm very blessed to say that I've been working since March of last year, straight through, with maybe a week and a half off. between things. And it's been hard because, you know, live performances with an audience has been touch and go, and companies have had to figure out how to go about having in-person. So I've done 3 outdoor concert operas, which, you know, it's not the same thing acoustically when you depend on that, but again, audiences want to hear live music and we want to sing, so we do what we got to do, and one was in a soccer field, one was in a baseball field, one was in a parking lot.
Kidding. Wow.
And it's a lot. It's many firsts for many companies that aren't used to doing outdoor concerts, with having to deal with, as us too, with microphones and input to hear the orchestra because the orchestra is so far away. So it's a lot of adjusting, but glad that companies were able to do that for us.
Absolutely. You know, in terms of background of our collaboration, it kind of goes back 3 or 4 years now. And so you were actually supposed to be singing these Mahler songs with the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra in March of 2020. So right when the pandemic first hit, we sheltered in place and had to postpone concerts and everything like that. You would have been our next concert, and that concert was in the works and in preparation for probably a year and a half. So now fast forward, it's almost exactly 2 years after that. So really it's almost been about 4 years to have this come to fruition and to have you here. So thank goodness. Welcome.
Yes.
Thank you.
It's great to find it put it in one speak, you know.
Yes.
And just
exactly.
to be able to perform these pieces that are just incredible.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And changes too, like when you moved back to El Paso, I remember when before the pandemic, I had in my notes that, you know, because I'm not too far from Chicago, when I'm
Right.
in the orchestra, and so I was thinking, oh, we can meet up in Chicago and talk about the Mahler songs. Life changes have happened
Changes.
since then.
Yeah,
It's been
yeah.
so many years.
I lived for 13 years in Chicago and got tired of the snow. Tired of, you know, I think the snow's beautiful. I just hated digging my car out.
We can all relate. We can all relate.
So, yeah.
Well, so tell us about your thoughts about these specific Mahler songs. We have a song cycle of 4 songs that are very early Mahler, from his early 20s, basically, or around the time he was about 24 years old. In fact, one of them is directly quoted in his first symphony from a few years later. So if you think, oh, that sounds like Mahler's first symphony, if you're a Mahler nut or a what's the word that they use? Malaria? Or Mahler or something like that, yeah. So if you're like me and a big fan of Mahler, you'll hear this second movement of this Songs of the Wayfarer and think that's the first symphony. This did come first. This came out of a time of rejected love. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your thoughts on it and the piece itself?
You know, what I find interesting, you know, the Ruckert leader, he used Ruckert's poetry, right? And all these composers were looking for either popular poets or poets that had been used by other composers. But this particular piece has his poetry, and it's his poetry from a personal standpoint. And clearly, of what I understand, as a conductor, Mahler had a tendency of falling in love with his leading ladies.
Yeah, it's true.
And many times he was, many times he was rejected. And so, you know, these come from a very personal point of view for him.
Yeah, there was one in particular, a soprano named, I think, Johanna Richter.
Correct.
You know, so he was dejected by her, and these 4 songs of the Songs of the Wayfarer almost depict like a journal entry after a hard breakup. It's that, like, it's just like that, yeah.
And it's a real view into that, the beauty and the heartbreak and the rawness of emotion. And it's interesting to see the different markings in the piano score, which I'm sure mirror the orchestral score, but how he fights the emotions with markings, without emotion. Literally says, knows that really. And it is this numbness that he is kind of projecting. But then he comes back with more conflict and more heartbreak.
Yeah, I think he was trying to tell us to really make these personal and use the whole spectrum of a singer's art, and not just have to sing it out, you know, like you're singing a thing. No, this is so personal that there are times exactly where it's kind of raw, or like you're in denial, or
Absolutely,
you know, there's
yeah.
all these other kinds of colors of the singer's spectrum that he's asking for, and that with the German itself too, there's such incredible, like, I don't know, like sounds that you can get from the German, and expressivity with that text. So
Yeah, and again, it's really weird because you get to some of these words that are so, again, raw and so full of emotion, but you're hit with that instruction to be not emotional, to be completely void of it. So it is this disconnect, this conflict in his head and in the writing. It's beautiful.
And sometimes he lets the orchestra do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the orchestra is simply backing you up, and other times the orchestra is telling a little bit other side of the story. And he knows that he can't sustain a whole song cycle of depressed heartbreak. So that there are these moments of repose that are beautiful, like where he finds solace in nature, very Beethovenian, right? He finds solace in nature, and in the first movement and in most of the second movement, that's kind of an important part of it. You know, he listens to a bird song, and he's like, oh, I wish I could just sing like you, bird. Yeah. Isn't it a beautiful day? Yeah, it was a beautiful day.
And
then back down. Yeah. It's like, nature's great, but it's not going to take him out of his depression. It takes him out of the depression for about 30 seconds, and then go back in. But the most intense of these four songs is probably the third movement, where he's overly dramatic, you know, Mahler, and the singer, you know, sometimes we get dramatic. So tell them a little bit about that one.
Well, he describes this dagger in his heart, and he gets really descriptive on, you know, how, you know, it really gets to that, you know, point, you know, that this is, how is this happening? And even when I close my eyes, I can still feel it. I can still, you know, feel that anguish and stuff. So it's the third movement is the burst of that reality that I think that he's been fighting. He knows what it is, but he fights it, and he finally lets it go.
The orchestra provides incredible sonorities in this one, with muted trumpets and very harsh-sounding trombones and stopped French horns, where they have to put their hands so far up the bell of the French horn that it makes it sound like bzzz. And he uses that to incredible poetic musical effects. But also in this one, there's this sense that, yes, he's dejected and he still loves her, but now she's like mocking him. He hears her laughing, and she's getting married and she's laughing at him, and it's like this like horrific nightmare almost.
Yeah, it's like that the movement before, you hear the birds in the orchestration, here you hear the laughter of the mocking in it.
So intense.
And it's just, Mahler does this incredible job of that text painting, that orchestral painting.
Yeah. And then the last movement comes, and it starts off with essentially a funeral march. And Mahler wrote a lot of funeral marches. In his first symphony, there's another famous one. And so it starts off with a funeral march, and how do you go from there? You know, it sounds very kind of dirge-like. But that's not necessarily a funeral march in the text. I should just say musically it sounds like a funeral march. He's just singing about the two blue eyes of his beloved. You know,
and that there's that sparkle. It's minor, right? And there's a sparkle where it goes into major, and you think, okay, then back down to minor.
Yes. And there's a moment that he quotes the very opening of Berlioz's Symphony Fantastique, which you might not recognize it, but if you know, there's like these two flutes playing. Symphony Fantastique, of course, is a famous story about dejected love, and an idea affects a musical idea that depicts a beloved. And here Mahler, who knew that symphony, of course, really well. And don't forget, Mahler was primarily a conductor, known as a conductor in his day, not a composer. But anyway, so, and although he was an opera conductor, he would have known Symphony Fantastique well. There's a little bit of a hint of that. But that leads to a section of innocence and sort of childlike simplicity, where he tries to find some comfort sitting under a tree and getting back to nature. And there's this imagery of sort of innocence. Maybe, it's like a glimpse of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But one thing that I always wondered about Mahler is what his opera would have been like.
Yeah, if he had written
if he had been an opera. I mean, because to me, it's all there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all there in his pieces.
It would have been so intense.
Oh, yeah.
So now part of me thinks that I love these songs, but I know that not everybody in the audience would be able to handle the ending of this 4-movement cycle on that dark note, on that kind of soft, quiet ending of this piece, which even though it ends with that childlike simplicity, there's a sort of question, again, a musical question mark right at the end. It doesn't end with a resolution, perhaps. And so we have a bonus for you, a 5th song that's not part of the song cycle, Songs of the Wayfarer. It's part of it's not really a group of songs, but 5 songs that he wrote with the text of Friedrich Rückert that Levi mentioned. These are from much later in his life. Actually, they were written over different periods, and the Rückert Lieder are not necessarily intended to be performed together. They just happen to all be by Rückert, this poet. But, so it's okay, I think, for us to take out one of them, which happens to be one of my all-time favorite pieces of music. This piece called, I hate the English translation, but I Am Lost to the World. That's the piece that will end the first half of the concert tomorrow. So, and now this is special. For me, I've always dreamed of conducting this piece. It's so gorgeous. I don't want to just gush, I want to give you a chance. Tell us about this piece, Levi.
For me, it's this beautiful, the text is just so interwoven beautifully, and the feeling projected through the text. But for me, the final page is that release that I live in the song, in my song.
So, and I think this is really all the Mahler songs and many of the other parts of this concert really speak to the title of Time to Reflect. But this is one where we can reflect on our own soul's journey and what feeds our soul and where we truly live. This is the story, again, in this poetry by Rückert of an artist or musician who has sort of lived in the world with the tumult of the world and daily things, but has already started to let it go. I don't know if they're at the end of their life or if they're just realizing that in a more true sense, their real soul and their real persona is not of this world. It's in their art. And so that's a story that's being told here, and that Mahler related so much to this poem and to this song. He said that it was this song and this poetry expressed his very self. So Mahler really understood this, and he set this poem so lovingly. And one of the things I love that you said was that the interweaving, because one of the things that happens throughout this short song is a beautiful musical pass-off from one instrument to the other, or from voice to instrument, or vice versa. And it's almost musically depicting going over to the other side, passing on, or being in another realm or another world. Musically, you have that, where an English horn melts into a clarinet, or an English horn melts into a violin, or the solo voice melts into a string instrument. And it's almost like there is this musical depiction of kind of being in another world, or going over into another world. And then there's just the incredible beauty of it. Like, Levi gets to sing what I think is the most beautiful A-flat ever written, ever. Ever.
I hope it's beautiful.
The thing is, it's not one of those ones that's beautiful, it's an A-flat. It's so delicate. It's on the word rude. He's saying, yes, I am dead to the tumult of the world, and in this calm place, I live in a calm, like distant other world now. And when he sings Rue, it's just so gorgeous. I am going to just kind of, pardon, the orchestra is playing something like this, and he sings. It sounds totally different with voice, though. Totally different. So, it's so gorgeous.
It is, and even the opening, the way the text comes out of that that texture, it's kind of like coming out of a fog in a sense. It's low in the voice, no matter what voice type you are. It's a very low entrance. Ich bin der Welt. And it just comes out of the texture, out of nowhere. You hear it in instruments a couple of times, and then all of a sudden, it's like this silver string that comes out.
It does.
It's beautiful. I get chills just thinking about it.
You know, in a song like this, you would expect there to be maybe a little introduction by the accompaniment, and he gives us that. But then when that introductory music ends, you expect the voice to come in. And in this song, when that introduction ends, it's as if he's writing the voice and us in that drama and persona to be hesitant. He doesn't come in. The first violins play. They play his part. It's almost like he's too hesitant to come in. They go, "Party, party," and finally he gets up the courage to come in and join them, and then floats in and then just sort of soars. It's gorgeous.
Absolutely.
But it's kind of funny that you don't come in where the first violins do with the melody. It's that written in hesitation almost, that I am lost to this world. It's almost like a realization of it. Throughout the course of this song, he or she, and sometimes this is sung by women. It's not specified by Mahler to be a baritone. Sometimes it's sung by mezzos and others. But it's definitely a low voice. It's like over the course of the song, the singer becomes more and more like resolved to the fact that yes, this other artistic realm and this heaven where I have my song and my love and my soul in heaven, this is where I belong and this is where I am now. That's sort of the process from the beginning of the song to the end. He or she is resolved to be there. Yeah. Sorry, I just gushed.
No,
I'm letting you talk.
no.
Please say more about it.
No, I love everything you're saying, and you're saying quite a bit of everything that I would have said. It's I'm happy that we're doing it. I wasn't sure if we were doing it because it was, as when I got here today, I asked, are we still doing the Rupert?
I was like, are you kidding?
And I had
waited my whole life to conduct this piece. I'm not going to
So
not do
I'm
it.
so happy to be doing that.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you're so excited about it as I am. And yeah, just thrilled for us to get to experience your artistry. For our audiences here, again, for me, it's our first time working together, and I hope our first of many.
Absolutely.
Such a pleasure. Thank
Likewise.
you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you all for coming again. And for those of you tuning in online, we appreciate you being here. One of the things I didn't mention about the concert, which is another exciting part of it, is that there's another multimedia element, which is that this concert will also have our art and music, where art students from throughout the area listened to the Samuel Coleridge Taylor novelette and created artwork based on it. That art will be in the lobbies of the Civic Center for you to see, and then the sort of top winning art selections from the judged exhibition will be projected as a slideshow while we perform the piece. And then I did want to mention that although we are performing the Mahler songs in German, we also will be projecting the translation, so everybody will be able to be with you in the moment to know what you're singing. So I think that's so important. I also want to thank all of you for supporting the Cheyenne Symphony Orchestra through all these different times and for coming out. I'm excited about the concert tomorrow. I hope you'll come and tell your friends. And I also want to thank again our wonderful hosts, the Laramie County Library. And to tell you a little bit more about what's happening at the Laramie County Library, please welcome Elizabeth.
Thank you for coming today. I just have a couple of items I'd like to highlight for March. Our March calendar is available online, and the printed calendars will be available shortly. On Saturday, March 5th, we will be opening this year's seed library. We have almost 160 seeds, so please come and take a look.
It's different kinds, not just 160.
Oh, we have many seeds, many more than we've ever had.
Hundreds and thousands of seeds, but 160 varieties.
We are looking at something like 12,000 packets of seeds.
Wow. That's
Yeah, it's a lot of seeds.
That's wonderful.
And then on Saturday, March 26th, we will have some people from the Parkinson's Association of the Rockies They will be here to do one-on-one sessions with people who have questions about Parkinson's disease and Parkinson's treatment. That is a sign-up event, so please take a look at our calendar online. And please join us in April for the final event of our symphony season. Thank you again for coming today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you.